I'd like you also to know that Jason is also the program director of the Vivian S. Delbrook Visiting Writer Series at Butler University, where he also teaches courses on literature, art, and the environment. Our next essayist, I discovered, had an intense interest in the environment after reading the story he wrote about an Environmental Protection Agency report. That report stated that many of Indiana's waterways are among some of the worst in the nation. Some are in such bad condition that many are not safe for human contact. Yet, our children and others play in them all the time. Carson Gerber is a nationally recognized award-winning journalist. He's currently covering the state issues for a newspaper chain called CNHI. Carson has worked in Indiana and Ohio for more than a decade, reporting on local topics and environmental impact of industry on Hoosier communities. Please welcome and give a hand for Carson Gerber.
Thanks, Avon. Yeah, I was pretty excited when you reached out to me about doing this. I've been an advocate my whole life, art lover, and I do environmental reporting, so this is right up my alley. But my essay is kind of a good follow-up to Jason's. Him looking back at sort of the devastation caused by colonialism on the environment. My essay is looking at the Isaac Walton League, which was established to combat just that. I think Avon wanted the essay because Isaac Walton was a huge sponsor of the project here. But digging into it, they're a pretty fascinating group. This is 100 years for them. They were founded in 1922. So they've been doing this for 100 years, and they've really done a lot. I don't think they get as much credit as they should for their conservation work. I think a lot of people know them as sort of skeet shooting, fishing, sort of a more outdoor recreation group, but they've done a lot of really important conservation work. So my essay is looking at their history, sort of what they've done, and it's not super long, so I'm going to read the whole thing. You can bear with me. I'll try to make it interesting. Indiana playing catch-up in conservation efforts is the name of the essay here. The Grand Calumet River only takes a short 13-mile jaunt west from Gary before it empties into Lake Michigan through the Indiana Harbor and Ship Canal. That short stretch of stream carries some of the most polluted water in the United States. Today, the river has been designated as a Great Lakes Areas of Concern under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, due in part to its fish consumption restrictions, beach closings, and fish and animal deformities. The river's pollution reached its pinnacle in the mid-20th century with steel mills, oil refineries, and other industrial factories, flooding the waterway with millions of cubic feet of toxic sludge. The river's vibrant fish population of carp, northern pike, bluegill, and yellow perch virtually disappeared. Those that did survive were likely to have deformities, eroded fins, lesions, and tumors. It was the same story for lakes and rivers around the nation. In 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire for the 13th time after decades of oil and debris buildup in the waterway. It wasn't the largest or most devastating fire on the river, but it captured the attention of the nation after Time magazine did an expose on the incident. Suddenly, the country's eye turned toward the decades of unnoticed pollution dumping into rivers and streams, especially those in highly industrial areas like the Grand Calumet River in Gary. In response, Congress took one of the most bold and sweeping steps toward conservation by passing the National Environmental Policy Act. It was signed into law on January 1st, 1970, and helped establish the Environmental Protection Agency that same year. Well, one conservation group didn't want the government to be the only ones keeping an eye on the health of the nation's waterways. For the Isaac Walton League of America, protecting rivers and streams was a duty of all its members and to all those who called America home. Congress passed its environmental policy in 1969. That same year, the Isaac Walton League started Save Our Streams, the only nationwide program training volunteers to protect waterways from pollution and collect water quality data that would be some of the first citizen-provided information to the EPA that it considered scientifically valid. The Isaac Walton League, one of the oldest conservation groups in the U.S., has spent the last 100 years fighting to protect the nation's waterways and sounding the alarm of environmental devastation happening across America. In fact, deteriorating water quality in lakes and rivers was the issue that brought 54 sportsmen to Chicago on January 14, 1922, who founded the group to protect the top fishing streams and rivers that were under the threat of industrial pollution. They named their new conservation group after Isaac Walton, the 17th century English author of The Complete Angler, the literary classic that praised the beauty and streams of Walton's homeland and documents the author's adventures teaching a novice fisherman about the sport and his philosophy about environmental stewardship. From the beginning, the Isaac Walton League made preserving America's rivers and streams its top priority. In 1927, zoologist and league member Henry Ward suggested to President Calvin Coolidge that the group could prepare a nationwide water quality survey. Coolidge commissioned the league to send questionnaires to health officials in all 48 states. It was the first national survey of its kind, and the results showed that sewage was responsible for 75% of the nation's water pollution because most sewer systems were not yet connected to any treatment facility. The study also determined the Midwest, Northeast, and California had the most polluted waterways. In response to the findings, 7 states rapidly passed laws to address water pollution. The league used that momentum to make a national push over the next decade to build sewage treatment plants in every community. Local chapters took up the cause, which led to new treatment facilities in towns and cities around the U.S. The league's emphasis on first-person observation and hands-on advocacy led chapters in Maryland to start a program called Save Our Streams. They modeled it after the state's Adopt the Highway program, but instead of roads, members adopted a waterway. Volunteers reported water pollution, removed trash and debris, and educated the public about preventing pollution. In 1972, thanks in part to efforts from the league, Congress approved the Clean Water Act, which allowed the EPA to implement pollution control programs and enforce policies that made it illegal to discharge any pollutant from a point source unless a permit was obtained. The Isaac Walton League celebrated the sweeping policy changes brought on by the legislation and hailed the Clean Water Act as one of the crowning conservation achievements. But the group knew it could not depend only on the EPA to keep the nation's rivers safe. In 1973, the league adopted and developed national guidelines for Save Our Streams and asked every chapter and member to adopt and clean up local waterway. In 1975, to get the word out about the new program, the league's new Save Our Streams director, Dave Whitney, jumped aboard a converted mobile home dubbed the Waterway and traveled to every state in the contiguous U.S. His message was simple, quote, "Water is vital to our lives. You can't make any more of this stuff." In the mid-1980s, the group partnered with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to develop a volunteer monitoring protocol to gauge a stream's health based on the presence of insects and other aquatic life. In 1990, the EPA approved the league's approach to ensuring scientifically valid data, making it one of the first such quality assurance plans to be approved by the agency. Save Our Streams gradually picked up steam in chapters across the nation, but it took the Indiana division longer than that to fully embrace the power of the program. After it launched, local chapters continued to work independently on their own water quality programs. In north central Indiana town of Argos, members started a fish hatchery program and donated their first fish to the state's hatchery system. Others organized annual river cleanups. Chapters in northwest Indiana continued to work to restore wetlands around the Kankakee River, which was home to the largest inland marsh in the U.S. before it was nearly all destroyed and turned into farm ground. Some chapters eventually did take up the Save Our Streams program, but it wasn't until the 1990s that state leaders made a concerted push to adopt the program across all of Indiana. Organizers called a meeting and appointed a committee chairman at each of the state's 28 chapters. Then they sent off volunteers to start teaching at schools and youth programs in their regions. One project guide taught students about watersheds, pollution sources, and stream ecology, and then helped them create their own science projects monitoring the river's biology and water quality. Another Save Our Streams booklet taught students how to do critter counts, to identify the larvae of beetles, mayflies, worms, and other creatures to determine the stream's health. At one point, Save Our Streams was taught in every summer school class in the Indianapolis Public Schools District. Indiana's League division had consolidated the program, but that initial push gradually fizzled out into some chapters as they worked on their own projects, put more emphasis on the recreational activities, such as organizing skeet shooting and fishing tournaments. Since 2019, the National League and the State Division have sustained a prolonged push to reinvigorate the program. In 2021, the Indiana Division acquired 12 professional-grade kits to test water quality in lakes and rivers around the state. The kits cost several $100s and include different kinds of nets, dip strips for chemical testing, and reference materials. All that information can now be found on a nationwide database created by the League called Clean Water Hub. It's a first of its kind resource for water quality information from around the U.S. Members can submit current or historic data from testing kits, and all the information is publicly available using the interactive online map. In Indiana, more than 40 testing sites have been logged, most of which are along rivers and ditches in the Fort Wayne region. Data provided on the map through the Save Our Streams test kits plays a vital role in monitoring the state's waterways. The Indiana Department of Environmental Management only does site-specific testing on a fraction of the state's 62,550 miles of rivers and streams. Most water quality data used by the agency is derived from statistical calculations. Now, with more site-specific data provided by volunteers to supplement items testing, officials can more accurately shape Indiana's water quality programs and initiatives. And here's the last section called Adapting to a New Century. Since the Isaac Walt League of America was founded 100 years ago, Indiana's water quality has vastly improved. Fewer rivers are clogged with pollution and debris due to the EPA and IDEM actively enforcing clean water laws and fining those who violate them. Today, most Hoosiers don't give a thought to what's in the drinking water. But water pollution hasn't gone away. It's simply morphed into something more subtle and less conspicuous than the burning rivers and oil-soaked beaches of the 1960s. Today's threat is the runoff from tens of millions of acres of farms, suburban lawns, and parking lots in cities across America. And the new threat needs a new approach to Save Our Streams program. Samantha Briggs, the League's Clean Water Program Director, says, "Success today and in the future will be defined by detecting and tackling this 21st century threat." In Indiana, one of the most pressing issues is curbing runoff from concentrated animal feeding operations, known as CAFOs, and fields that eventually flows into the Mississippi River. That runoff is full of nutrients that sucks oxygen out of water. Enough of it has now ended up in the Gulf of Mexico to create a 1.4 million acre environmental disaster called the Dead Zone that kills nearly all aquatic life there, and Indiana contributes about 11% of that fish killing runoff. Where exactly does that runoff come from in Indiana? That's what programs like Save Our Streams can help determine through volunteer testing and monitoring. Briggs saying, "If most streams in America are not regularly monitored, there is no way to detect drastic pollution events. In other words, you don't know what you don't know." The Indiana Division also is getting back to the program's educational roots, teaching kids about what clean water actually means. Jim Sweeney, a member of the Spring Lake chapter and a National Executive Board member, has taken a unique approach by participating in canoe-mobile events each year to show students the magic of macroinvertebrates. The kids just eat that stuff up when you show them all those bugs, Sweeney said. It's a good learning tool. The Isaac Walton League has spent the last century fighting and advocating for clean water, and the organization shows no signs of stopping. New initiatives like the Salt Watch program are getting members and everyday citizens to advocate for less road salt, which can create unhealthy water conditions for aquatic animals and end up in our drinking water. The League has also created a new Critter Creek app on phones to help kids and families identify the bugs and other creatures that indicate a healthy stream. It all stems from the vision laid out by the League's founders 100 years ago to protect the nation's waterways, woods, and wildlife. That vision included advocating for legislative changes, connecting Americans to the outdoors, and providing citizens with programs like Save Our Streams that turns data into action. Indiana's Save Our Streams director, Edward Wininski, said both the National League and the Indiana Division continue to implement that vision and advocate for changes to protect local waterways over the next century. After all, if conservation groups like the Isaac Walton League don't continue to raise the alarm, who will? Wininski saying, "We're trying to bring that to the public, not in a radical way, but in a common sense way. It's a never-ending process. Just when we think we've crossed the bridge, so to say, we come up against another flooded stream. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.